So this is the lesson for 8-4 day one. What we're doing is volume combinations, or what they call composite figures. What you have today is you don't just have one shape, you have a combination of shapes. So for example, in this one, you have a hemisphere sitting on top of a cone. What you're gonna have to do is find the total volume of the hemisphere plus the cone. Or maybe like in this one, you have a cone sitting on top of a cylinder. So you have to add together those two volumes. Or like in this one, we have a hemisphere on top of a cylinder. So you would have to add together those two volumes. So remember a couple reminders. Remember that pi is really the pi button on your calculator, or 3.1416. You have to know the difference between a radius and a diameter. The diameter, remember, goes all the way across the circle, where the radius only goes halfway across the circle. So anytime that you're given the diameter, you have to divide it by 2 to find your radius. You're going to have some cylinders today. Remember, the formula for volume of a cylinder is pi r squared h. For a cone, it is 1/3 pi r squared h. Remember, for 1/3, the easiest way to use 1/3 is just 1 divided by 3. However, you could use 0.333333, filling up that whole entire screen with threes. For a sphere, it is 4/3 pi r cubed. For 4/3, the easiest thing to use is 4 divided by 3, or you could use 1.333333. Remember, for r cubed, that's really r to the third power. So you have to use the caret button 3, or remember, if your calculator doesn't have a caret button, the y to the x or x to the y button, or you might have to do radius times radius times radius. So like in this one, because the radius would be 6, it would be 6 times 6 times 6. A hemisphere, remember, is half of a sphere. So that's why we have the 1/2 or 0.5 in front of the formula. So we have 0.5 times 4/3 times pi r cubed. So when we start looking at these, in this one, we have a hemisphere on top of a cone. My suggestion to you to make your life easier is write the formulas right underneath those first. It's very easy in this section because we have so many different letters and numbers in each calculation. It's very easy to accidentally skip over something. So I find it very, very helpful to write the formula underneath what we're talking about. So a hemisphere is 1/2 times 4/3 times pi times your radius cubed, plus we have the cone. The cone is 1/3 pi r squared h. Again, I think it's very, very helpful to write those down first. Now, just like the previous questions, you're going to have half of your questions today where you have to round to the nearest tenth. So you're going to include pi in those calculations. But then you're going to have the other half of the calculations where you're going to have to leave your answer in terms of pi, so you're not going to type pi into the calculator. So if this was a rounding to the nearest 10th question, you're going to type in everything, including the pi symbol. So let's take a look at our picture and figure out our parts and our pieces. Well, here we have our circle. Now, that circle is the bottom of the hemisphere, but it's also the circle for our cone. This 7 goes from the center of that circle out towards the edge. So this 7 is the radius for our hemisphere. It's also the radius for our cone. It's part of both shapes. This 25 goes the height of the cone. So that is the h for our cone. Subbing the numbers into the formula where they belong. We still have our 1/2. Remember, you could use 0.5 instead. I'm actually going to write 0.5 instead. I think it's easier to type into the calculator that way. So 0.5 times 4/3 times pi Now for our hemisphere, the radius is 7. So we have 7 to the third power plus we have 1/3 times pi times our radius, which is 7 for our cone, squared times 25. Now, this is a lot to type all into the calculator at once, but that's probably the easiest way to do it. You're going to type in every single thing exactly how it is into the calculator. Now, if you wanted to, you could do the hemisphere separately and the cone separately and then add together your answers in the end. I think it's easiest just to type in everything all at once. When you type in everything all at once, you get a big long decimal answer. You get 2001.19452, blah, blah, blah at the end. Remember, these decimals are going to be big, long, ugly decimals because of the pi symbol. You are going to round your answer to the nearest tenth. The 1 is in the tens place. You have to look at the number after it. That is 5 or higher. So you're going to take this 1 and round up to a 2. So we get 2001.2 as our answer. If we are going to leave our answer in terms of pi, so if we had to leave our answer in terms of pi, you want to type in everything except for the pi symbol. So we're going to have our 0.5 still. We're still going to have our 4/3. We're not going to type in the pi symbol, but we're still going to have 7 to the third power. We're still going to have our plus sign. We're still going to have our 1/3. We're still going to have our 7 squared, and we're still going to have our 25 at the end. Remember, all that we're doing with the pi symbol is just sticking it in at the end of our answer, because when it says leave in terms of pi, you're going to get a number and then pi as our answer. This time you're going to type in all of this all at once. Again, you could do them separately and then add them together in the end. That would be fine. But no matter which way you do it, for this particular problem, you get 637 pi. I did not round that answer. Remember, you don't round the answer that are in terms of pi. This is exactly what I got on the calculator. In Class Kick, remember that you would type in 637 and then write the word pi at the end, no spaces in between the 7 and the p. I know it's a lot to type in the calculator all at once, but that's how you do these questions. Take a look at the next one. In this one, we have a cone sitting on top of a cylinder. Now, they will try and trick you with your shapes a little bit. First of all, let's take a look at our formulas. For cone, we have 1/3 pi r squared h. For our cylinder, we just have pi. We have pi r squared h. I don't know why my thing is doing that. We have pi r squared h. So those are our two formulas that we're going to use. When we take a look at identifying our parts and our pieces in our cone, notice that the 2 is the height of the cone. All right, that makes sense. But for your radius, now it looks like it's blank right here. All right, it looks like it's blank. Well, what is the radius? Well, in our cylinder, what you have to remember about a cylinder is that the top and the bottom of the cylinder are the same thing. So this 1 at the bottom is really the same thing as our radius right here for the top of the cone. So we have 1 as our radius for the top of the cylinder. It's also 1 as the radius of the circle part of our cone. So this r is 1 for our radius, because the top and bottom of the cylinder are the same. Those are a shared part. Now, they try and trick you with the height of the cylinder. Notice that the 2 is the height of the cone. This 13 goes the entire length, right? It goes this entire length of our whole picture, not just the cylinder. So this 13, what we have to do to find our height of our cylinder is we have to take and do 13 minus 2. We have to take our whole length, subtract out the 2 from the height of our cone, and therefore we're left with a height of 11 for our cylinder. So sometimes you might have to calculate some things. They might try and trick you a little bit by what you're given. So if we were rounding to the nearest tenth, 1/3 stays 1/3, pi stays pi. Our radius for our cone is 1, so times 1 squared. Our height of our cone is 2, so times 2. Now looking at our cylinder, pi stays pi. Our radius of our cylinder, whether you look at the top or whether you look at the bottom, is 1. And then the height of the cylinder is 11. Make sure that you don't use that 13. Remember that 13 was our cone and our cylinder all together. We really don't use that 13 in our calculations at all. So you're going to take and type this big long thing right into the calculator all at once. When you do that, you get a big long decimal answer, 36.65191,429, blah, blah, blah at the end. You're going to round your answer to the nearest tenth. The 6 is in the tenths place. You need to look at the number after it. That's 5 or higher. So this is going to round up to be 36.7. Leaving our answer in terms of pi. Now, in terms of pi, you want to type in everything that we typed into the calculator except for our pi symbol. So we're still going to have 1/3. We're not going to type in the pi. We still have 1 squared. We still have our 2. We still have our plus sign. We're not going to type in the pi. We still have our 1 squared, and we still have the 11. Remember that all that we're doing with our pi symbol is sticking it at the end of our answer. So what you're typing into the calculator is what's in the blue box there. When you go and do that, you really get 11.6 repeating. So you're going to type in 11.666666666 pi. Now your calculator might try and put a 7 at the end of that. The calculator is just trying to round it. There's really no 7 there. It's really 11.6 repeating pi. Go ahead and try this one on your own. You have a hemisphere sitting on top of a cylinder. Go ahead and try this one, please. Find your answer both ways. Give you about 30 more seconds or so. Find it both ways, rounding to the nearest tenth and leaving it in terms of pi, please. So looking at our picture, we have our circle right here for our hemisphere. This 10 goes halfway across the circle, so that is your radius. It is also the top of the cylinder, so that is also the radius for the cylinder. The height of the cylinder is 16. So we have 1/2 times 4/3 times pi times 10 to the third power, because 10 is our radius, plus, now looking at the cylinder, we have pi times 10 squared, that's a 10, 10 squared times our height, which is 16. You're going to type in this whole thing all at the same time. When you do that, you get a big long decimal. You get 7,120.943348, blah, blah, blah at the end. Rounding to the nearest tenth, the 9 is in the 10th spot. You have to look at the number after it. That's 4 or lower. So this is going to stay the same, 7,120.9. If we are going to leave our answer in terms of pi, you need to type in everything except for that pi symbol. Remember that the pi symbol is just going to go at the end of our answer. So you're still going to have your 1/2. You're still going to have your 4/3. You're not going to type in pi. You're still going to have your 10 to the third. Still going to have your plus sign. Not going to type in pi. Still going to have your 10 squared. Still going to have your times 16. So this is what you're typing in the blue box right into the calculator to leave it in terms of pi. And you should get 2,266.66666666666, or 6 repeating pi. On your calculator, again, you might have gotten a repeat. You might have got a 7 at the end. The calculator is just trying to round that last digit. Just ignore that last digit, please. Now, you're not only going to have shapes that have 2 of them put together, but you might have some like this where you have 3 shapes all together. So you have a cone sitting on top of a cylinder, sitting on top of a hemisphere. So again, I think it's very helpful to write in your formulas. For cone, we have 1/3 pi r squared h. For cylinder, we just have pi r squared h. For hemisphere, we have 1/2 times 4/3 pi r cubed. I think it's very helpful to write all that down. Taking a look at our picture and identifying the parts and pieces from the picture. For our cone, the 2 is your height. The 1.5 is your radius. So I'm going to have 1/3 times pi times 1.5 times 2. For our cylinder in the middle, the radius is the same thing as it is for the cone, because that's a shared part. So our radius is 1.5. We can also find our radius there at the bottom of 1.5. The height is 3.5. So times pi times 1.5 squared times 3.5. For our hemisphere at the bottom, we have our radius. This 1.5 is also our radius. So we have, because that can go in any direction, so we have 1/2 times 4/3 times pi times 1.5 to the third power. That's a lot to type into the calculator all at once, but that's how you could do it. Or you could type in each one individually and then add your answers together. You could do it that way as well. When you do that, you get a big long decimal answer, 36.5210146, blah, blah, blah at the end. Rounding to the nearest tenth, the 5 is in the tenths place. You need to look at the number after it. That is 4 or lower, so that stays the same, 36.5. If we are going to leave our answer in terms of pi, you have to go back up to this blue box and type in everything except for the pi symbols. So you have 1/3 still. You have your 1.5 squared times 2 plus 1.5 squared times 3.5 from our cylinder plus 1/2 times 4/3 times 1.5 to the third power. You're going to type in all of that right into the calculator. When you do that, you get 11.625. And since we're leaving it in terms of pi, you have to stick the pi symbol at the end. Again, my suggestion is write down your formulas. All right. Write down your formulas, sub in what you know, and find your answers. It's a lot easier to look at something and type it in from something that's written down rather than trying to type it in as you go. Make sure that you pay attention between your radius and your diameter.